Hey there. I just wanted to let you know that next week I will be offering a free live VBAC prep workshop called 3 Steps to Have an Empowered VBAC, even without a supportive provider. The 2 sessions will be on Wednesday, October 9th at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The second session is Tuesday, October 15th at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You don't have to attend both. You can attend either one, or you can attend both if you'd like. Again, this will be live. Some of the things I'll be covering in the workshop are how to shift from fear and doubt to confidence and empowerment when it comes to your VBAC, the power of effective communication and boundary setting, and how you can still have a strong support system even without a supportive provider. This workshop is perfect for anyone, whether you're trying to conceive or currently pregnant and preparing for a VBAC. Again, the 2 dates currently being offered are Wednesday, October 9th at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and Tuesday, October 15th at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you want to find out more and register for one of the workshop dates, please go to thehannahgill.com/workshop. Hey there, friend. So today's episode, I'm going to try to keep short, but it's about a topic that I'm extremely passionate about and I could talk about forever. And whether you are preparing for your VBAC or even if you're a first-time mom, this episode is going to be extremely beneficial for you because today we are talking about the topic of cervical exams. And I think you're going to be surprised about some of the things I have to say about getting cervical exams during your pregnancy and birth. I'm your host, Hannah Gill, and this is Motherhood Flow. So let's talk about cervical exams or vaginal exams or cervical checks or dilation checks or whatever you want to call them. Cervical exam is when a provider or a nurse inserts their fingers and hands into your vagina to feel your cervix and check the position of your cervix, the effacement or the thinness of your cervix, and the dilation or the openness of your cervix. And this is often used to determine how dilated you are and how effaced you are, which some people think will tell you how soon or how likely you are to go into labor. And even if you don't realize it, a cervical exam and a cervical check is an intervention even before labor and birth begin. During pregnancy, it is often offered. Starting around 38, 39 weeks is generally when I see it first being offered, as long as there's no major complications beforehand. And I want to let you know that these cervical exams, especially before labor, are truly unnecessary. There are very, very few instances where a cervical exam before labor would be needed. So why are they unnecessary? Because how dilated or effaced you are at any given moment will not tell you how soon you will go into labor or how quick or long your labor will be. You could be 4 centimeters dilated for a month walking around like that, or you could be not dilated at all and go to complete and having a baby within just a few hours. So the moment you have a cervical exam done and what your numbers are at that time do not mean anything for what's going to happen in the next hours, days, weeks. And even based on who is doing the cervical exam, those numbers can be different based on their experience, based on their hands, based on the position you're in. Someone could come in 10 minutes after and do another cervical exam, and the numbers could be different based on who is doing that exam. And one of the main arguments I see for why women get a cervical exam is that, I'm just a type A planner. I like to know. I have to have this information. I want a sense of control. I was this way, especially my first pregnancy, because hello, over here, I am a type A planner and I didn't know any different. So I just got cervical exams because they were offered to me my first pregnancy. But what I have seen personally for myself and for my doula clients and just for women in general that I have talked to is that knowing these numbers, knowing your dilation and effacement and the position of your cervix does not actually give you a sense of control or peace or relieve any anxiety. It actually does the opposite more often than not, because women often get discouraged, especially if you're going for a VBAC and you already have this sense of doubt or hesitancy about your body and its ability to birth. As soon as you know those numbers, no matter what they are, oftentimes you think, well, gosh, why am I only dilated to a 3? Why am I not effaced at all? I am 39 weeks. Why do I not have any dilation? and it automatically puts a seed of doubt and anxiety and stress and fear into your mind, which will then increase your cortisol levels and will not be beneficial for the birthing process. Being stressed is not going to help you go into labor at all. So more often than not, especially before labor and in labor, I see women getting discouraged and frustrated by these numbers instead of being happy about wherever their bodies may be. Because again, how dilated or effaced you are is not going to tell you anything about how quickly, how soon, or anything about when you're going to go into labor. And I want people to understand that a cervical exam is an intervention at all stages. And knowing these numbers could be used, and knowing this information could be used to further do more interventions. So if you're 41 weeks or 40 weeks or whatever week you are, and your doctor is telling you, well, you're only dilated and effaced to this, so we should probably just go ahead and do a membrane sweep to get things going. Or you're only this dilated, so I really just think we need to induce you. Or if you're going for a VBAC and your provider just happens to not support inductions for VBAC, they might say, well, you're only such and such centimeters dilated. We should just go ahead and schedule that C-section. So knowing this information is really more beneficial and on the side of your provider than it is for you, because it's likely that knowing these numbers is going to lead to further interventions. I do also want to mention the risks of getting cervical exams while you're in labor. One, even before labor, they're uncomfortable for a lot of women. They can be painful. They can cause bleeding, irritation, but they can also, if your water is broken, that introduces more risk of infection. And yes, they're using gloves and everything, but anything that goes into your vagina is going to risk infection being there. Although the risk of infection is low before your water breaks, it's possible. And then there's always the risk that having a cervical exam or a membrane sweep or something like that done breaks your water before you want it to break. So that is an additional risk you need to consider. And this is even possible before labor begins. A cervical exam could be done. It could be done too roughly or too aggressively, or not even too roughly or too aggressively, but your water can break before you want it to, before contractions are starting, and that causes a whole nother scenario. So just think about the potential risks and benefits of getting these cervical exams done. I would really appreciate if you're able to, if you could pause right now and leave a rating or review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to, because that does help boost visibility and help spread the word about the show. I would greatly appreciate that. All right. Now, I'm all for informed decision making and making your own choices and doing what feels best to you. So I want to encourage you to do some internal reflection and some deep thought about why you are personally wanting or needing or feel like you have to have cervical exams, especially before labor begins. Is it that you want a sense of control? Consider that. Is it that you want to know the numbers to ease your anxiety or ease your fears or have more knowledge about your body and what it's doing? Reflect on those things. Think about, why do I really want to do this? Is it just because my doctor is offering it at 38 or 39 weeks? Is it because my body didn't dilate before as I expected it to, or as my doctor expected it to? So I just really need to know. Or are you a first-time mom and you don't know any different and you feel like, oh, this is just what you do. You need to know these numbers to know how your labor is going to go. Think about all these things, do some reflection, and know your why before making decisions. Make sure you know the pros and cons. Make sure your doctor or provider or midwife or whoever goes over these pros and cons with you, because they're not unimportant. They are extremely important to consider the risks and benefits and pros and cons. And generally, especially before labor, there's not much benefit. There is one, more than one, but one general reason why a cervical exam may be necessary before labor. Even in these situations, if you don't want them, you don't have to get them. But for me personally, I chose not to get any cervical exams for my VBAC pregnancy, and I got very minimal cervical exams during my actual labor because I knew it would mess with my mindset. I knew it didn't mean anything and that I could go into labor quickly or slowly, regardless of my numbers. But one of the reasons I would have chosen to get a cervical exam prior to labor was if I was facing a medically necessary induction, I would have gotten a cervical exam to help know what my Bishop's score is. For those of you that don't know what a Bishop's score is, it's kind of like a calculation that's done based on a varying factors like your dilation, your effacement, the position of your cervix, and potentially a few other things about how likely an induction is to be successful for your body. So if you have a lower Bishop score, it's generally recommended not to induce. If you have a higher Bishop score, then an induction is more likely to be successful. Some women, if you have a medically necessary induction, regardless of what your Bishop score is, like you're going to have to get induced for safety purposes. And if your Bishop score is lower, that induction could be longer and harder for you. Not 100%, but it could be. If your Bishop score is higher, generally inductions are going to be easier and more successful, but not always. So those numbers are good to know if you have a medically necessary induction that you're facing, or even if you're choosing to electively induce, know your Bishop score before, because that'll give you an idea of what your induction could potentially look like, and make sure your provider is discussing this with you, because I see a lot of women go into elective inductions, especially not knowing that it could take days, literal days to get through an induction, and that it could be a very long and hard process. So there could be other medical complications that would require a cervical exam. For example, I got an cervical exam when I got to the hospital for my VBAC, because I went to the hospital because I had an excessive amount of bleeding without contractions or any other signs of labor. So I was just concerned about the bleeding and where that bleeding was coming from, why I was bleeding so much. So obviously, I wanted them to do a cervical exam, and of course, the hospital wanted to do a cervical exam as well to see where the bleeding was coming from potentially. So I did get that done when my labor started, or I guess before I knew my labor started, but because I was bleeding, and I chose to get minimal cervical exams during the labor process, because for me, I knew they would be a mindset thing, and I knew they weren't necessary unless I was just feeling the need to get one, and it felt right to me. Some women don't get cervical exams ever. They don't have them during pregnancy. They don't have them during birth. This is often more common in like a home birth setting. But if it feels right to you, do it. But just know why you're doing it. Do that self-reflection and that inner work to know why you're choosing something, and make that informed decision before opting for just a routine cervical exam. You can trust that before labor starts, that number means nothing for you for the most part. So I really encourage you to sit with that, and maybe sit with the discomfort of not knowing those numbers and how that can make you feel. And if you truly think that not knowing is going to be worse for your mental state than knowing and it not being what you wanted it to be. So if you're going for a VBAC and you think that this information is beneficial, and you know someone that's a first-time mom and they're pregnant for the first time, share this with them, because I think more first-time moms should know this information, because these cervical exams, especially during pregnancy before labor, can lead to so many more interventions. And if someone is wanting a low intervention birth, or maybe they don't realize they want a low intervention birth, I think it's important for them to know that these are not generally necessary. And of course, discuss that with your provider, but make these considerations when making your birth plans or going to your appointments later in pregnancy, and kind of what you're going to want, and have this open conversation with whoever your healthcare provider is and with yourself, and know why you're choosing them. Thank you so much for listening today. And until next time, keep flowing. You just finished another episode of Motherhood Flow. For more, head over to thehannahgill.com or on Instagram @thehannahgill. As a reminder, this podcast is provided to you for educational and entertainment purposes only. It should not be considered a substitute for medical advice. Until next time, keep flowing.